Ship him now. U.S. buyers jumped on the phone to their Chinese suppliers as soon as news reached of the Geneva breakthrough. Demand for goods from China was so high, in fact, that it almost led to a shipping container shortage, a sharp reverse from the situation just days ago. Following the high-stakes meetings in Geneva, tariffs came down significantly between the world's two largest economies, and a 90-day pause was set, while the two sides are expected to conduct high-level consultations under a joint mechanism. The surprise truce has been welcome news around the world. However, sentiments remain cautious. China underscored the importance of leveraging the stability and long-term growth of the domestic economy to cushion against global uncertainties. Going forward, will sharp pendulum swings be the new normal? How will the trade and economic talks unfold between the two sides? Who's more desperate for a deal? Welcome to this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you live from Beijing. I'm pleased to be joined from Singapore by Bert Hofman, professor at East Asia Institute at the National University of Singapore. Early in the morning from Lyon, France, by Zhou Mi, deputy director of the Institute of American and Oceania Study at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, and from Beijing by Ben Norton, founder and editor-in-chief of Geopolitical Economy Report. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So, from a trade blackout to a buying frenzy, but what does this latest state of affairs say about the interconnectedness of this trade relationship and how disrupted it has been?
Well, clearly there was a fall off in shipping just before the truce, and that showed that the tariffs would have a really big impact. Now that there is a truce, you see the trade coming up again. As a matter of fact, you probably see it coming stronger because in future the tariffs may go up again. This is a truce. This is not a deal, and by early August we might be in the same situation. So I think a lot of shippers say, okay, let's just get the goods out now so that we can come in with the lowest tariffs, because of course it takes some time to cross the Pacific, takes some time to clear customs, etc. So I think that's what you see at this point in time.
Right after the Geneva talks, Chinese President Xi Jinping told an international forum in Beijing there are no winners in tariff wars and trade wars, and bullying and hegemony will only result in self-isolation. When he talks about there's no winners, of course, China being one of the parties hit by the tariffs for sure, but it has moved swiftly to give out targeted assistance and policies to small businesses hit by the tariffs. Zhou Mi, can you tell us a bit more about exactly what China has been doing to help Chinese businesses weather this difficult period of time?
Well, it is true that for the international trade, we believe that this market should be playing the main functions in deciding where it wants to go. So for the enterprises, we have to understand what their situation is, because not all the enterprises, the exporters, are trying to focus on the market of the United States. So we have to collect this information and trying to identify who is the best choices and who are the most affected. And in this regard, we're helping those companies, especially when they are employing so many people. So we help them to know more about the possible markets and trying to encourage them to go to different exhibitions. And in some part, we are helping to facilitate the trade in the diversification. As one of the methods, I think that we collect some of these e-commerce platforms, and I think that they are voluntarily to trying to give more platforms and also the room for the exporters to go to the different markets, including the domestic ones. And I believe that is one of the messages. And we are also trying to collect some of the other issues, because it's not only about the export. We're also having some more difficulties in the import. So we support some of these companies to trying to find the alternatives like the import from other countries, including Latin American countries, and trying to reduce the impact of these high tariffs. I think the confidence is one of our most important things. So we encourage those companies to not only trying to stay there, we have to have a better positions in update their technology in the supply chain. I think that is one of the very important ways that we are facing some difficulties.
At a Thursday presser, China's Ministry of Commerce says the two sides will keep close consultational communication as per their Geneva understanding. Ben, what do we know about these consultation or this mechanism and how such communication will take place?
Well, there were reports in the Financial Times that actually 3 weeks ago, the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had a meeting with his Chinese counterpart. So it seems like there have been a few meetings that have been going on, and the Trump administration has claimed that it's willing to talk in the future, but we should keep in mind this is just a 90-day pause. It's very hard to predict what the Trump administration will do because part of Trump's strategy is he wants to keep other countries and even potentially, trading partners and U.S. allies, not just China, but even Canada, Mexico, European countries. He wants to keep them in a position of what he sees as vulnerability because Trump, according to his negotiation tactics, he thinks that gives the U.S. more leverage in negotiating what he sees as more favorable agreements.
Is that going to be the case with China? Will China be happy with being in the position of vulnerability going into these talks?
Well, no country, this is the point I'm getting at, actually. This is Trump's strategy, is he thinks that the U.S. has all of this leverage, but in reality, it's angering, of course, China, but it's also angering the rest of the world. And we've seen many signs that this is actually encouraging other countries, despite their political differences, to come together and find economic alternatives. So as an example of this, we saw that China participated in a meeting with the ASEAN countries of Southeast Asia and Japan and South Korea that was held in Italy. And they together released a joint statement saying that all of these countries and regions are working on deepening their economic and financial cooperation. We also saw a few days before Trump announced all of these tariffs on countries around the world, at the end of March, there was a historic meeting between the finance ministers and top economic officials of Japan, South Korea, and China that was held in Seoul. So Trump thinks that by pressuring all these countries and using instability as a tactic and uncertainty as a tactic, he thinks that it gives the U.S. more leverage. But actually, I think what it's done is it's encouraged other countries and firms around the world to seek alternatives. Trump says he wants to encourage more foreign investment, but the extreme uncertainty has actually led to less investment. And we've seen that countries have, including Japan, South Korea, and China, despite their differences, are trying to find ways to deepen their cooperation.
Actually, there's been great trade between China and Europe as well, just after the so-called Liberation Day. But let's talk about the consultation between China and the United States and the momentum that we are trying to discern. Bert, let me come back to you. For instance, China seems to have done something. China suspended its unreliable entity list and export control measures on multiple U.S. entities, which were announced after the April the 2nd on the U.S. side. The United States also reportedly slashed the de minimis tariffs on small shipments from China. And yet we are also seeing, for instance, the United States Bureau of Industry and Security, 2 days after the Geneva understanding, warned companies around the world which use Chinese advanced computing chips, such as Huawei's Ascend chips, risks violating U.S. export control and may be subject to enforcement action, which China immediately condemned, saying the United States is abusing its export controls and China will counter that with resolute measures. Are things headed in the right direction?
So in a way, Lucian, you've just given a good agenda for talks. We still need to talk about tariffs because tariffs are not yet low. Tariffs on China are still almost 40%, and they should be reduced further. B, there's a big issue on national security and how far does that go? It cannot be that there is a great uncertainty on national security issues, which are valid, but that there's a continuous shifting goalpost. So that's something that would be a China ask. Please let us let us define what is really the national security issue, and where are these small yards with high fences, so that we can actually continue to trade in everything else. The third area, and that is where the United States is quite keen, or let me just say it, President Trump is quite keen, is procurement agreements, as Besant said. Now that looks pretty much like the phase one deal from 2020, where China committed to buying a lot more from the United States to reduce the trade deficit. It didn't happen because of COVID, and then there were many other things that happened. So it sort of got derailed. But that element is still very important for the United States. So if you have that, tariffs, national security, and procurement agreement, that you can achieve within 90 days.
Mr. Zhou, what do you think of the time span of 90 days? Because if we're talking about these three areas, it's rather complicated, right? If you talk about, for instance, strategic decoupling, in the words of the Trump administration, how much entanglement is there going to be? Because China is opposed to this, and especially when the US is moving the goalpost all the time.
Well, it is still very difficult for us to try to resolve all the problems just in the 80 days or 90 days. In my understanding, that we should trying to first design some agenda on what kind of things we want to talk. So we have to make some sequences on all these topics, which one is more important and more emergence. So we have to understand that all the issues cannot be solved, maybe because the two economies are not just trying to solve these old problems, we're still facing too many new problems. So in this regard, we have to try to take care of the most important issues, like for the people, like for the small and medium-sized enterprises. How can we solve the problems of uncertainty of the global supply chains? How can we improve the better abilities to deal with the common challenges, like for the artificial intelligence or other issues? So in my understanding, we have to deal with that. If both of us trying to say that we are satisfied with those progress, I think that it is important for us to continue with our discussion even after 90 days. But in these 90 days, I think there are still so many things we have to do. It's not only about the commerce, it's also about the technology, about other industries. So we are having so many impacts, and in the meanwhile, I have to say that the United States is not have enough staff to deal with just the problem with China. They are still trying to negotiate with other trade partners, and that are also some of the shortages or challenges we have to face when we are going to deal with the problems between us.
So basically, Mr. Zhou is talking about a prolonged period of time where the two sides will engage if the goodwill sustains issue after an issue. So Ben, do you agree with that kind of imagination? I mean, how do you foresee the coming months, even years, when the two sides will try to work out these problems, if they will always stick with this friendly formula?
Yeah, I think it's right. And I think what's really happening is that the Trump administration had to take a step back, because with 145% tariffs on China, it's essentially a trade embargo. And the Trump administration, I think, really overplayed the U.S. hand and underestimated the degree to which the U.S. economy really needs significant exports from China. This is why a few days after announcing these sky-high tariffs on China, Trump actually quietly issued an exemption for Chinese electronics products, especially semiconductors, cell phones, and computers. That was a tacit acknowledgement that the U.S. economy really needs these products from China. And by doing this 90-day pause, it's another essential acknowledgement that the U.S., this idea of doing hard decoupling, it's not plausible. It's not going to happen. Now, I think there are many policymakers in Washington who would like to see a soft decoupling, and they would like to do it over years, but it's not going to happen immediately with 145% tariffs. And, China also showed that it can respond in several ways, in ways that are completely proportional. Let's keep in mind, Trump claimed that these tariffs were reciprocal. They actually were not reciprocal. If you look at the formula used by the White House when it announced these tariffs on so-called Liberation Day on the 2nd of April, the tariffs were based on the trade deficit that the U.S. has with each country. This is how, countries like Cambodia, which are relatively poor, but have a large trade surplus with the US, we're facing tariffs of almost 50%. It's not because Cambodia has tariffs of 50% on US goods. So, Trump, his policies have been unilateral. They're not reciprocal. China's response has been reciprocal, but China responded, of course, by restricting
The
the
thing,
export of rare earths.
yeah.
And this, very much concerned the US. So by taking this pause, essentially the US strategy is to take a step back and look for a way to have slow decoupling over time, although I'm still skeptical about that work.
How different is this going to be? But is this a consultation process going to be from the phase one deal? It's the phase one deal took 1 year and a half minimum to make, and this is only talking about a 90-day truce. Of course, we don't know how long it's going to take till a deal is reached, if there can be a deal, and how much dynamics have changed, right, over the past 5-6 years.
Well, you're right. That it took a very long time to get the phase one deal. And remember, there was at some point we thought we had a deal, and then it wasn't a deal, so it had to come back to the table. In a way, I like the 90 days because it actually puts some pressure on to get some things done 90 days from now. And I'm with Zhou Mi to say there's many other things that take a very long time that you need to continue to talk about, and that is AI, climate change, other things. But in 90 days, you can achieve some. One of the things I forgot to mention before was, for instance, fentanyl, where there's been a lot of debate. There was good cooperation between the US and China, and then that got stopped in light of the tariffs that were announced from the United States. That can be picked up again. Once you do that, the United States could say, okay, well, then we reduce the 20% tariff that is related to fentanyl. So that can be easily done. That's a stroke of the pen type of thing that you can do within 90 days. Then there is an agenda that is much longer term. And I think the establishment of a consultation mechanism, which has now been done, that will last much longer than the 90 days.
Let's certainly watch the situation. We do not know at this moment, but meanwhile, businesses will have to hang in there. They will have to find ways to cope with this unknown period of uncertainty, and people are wondering who's more desperate or who's stronger in terms of weathering that kind of period. After the Geneva talks, international financial institutions reacted by upgrading China's GDP growth target for 2025. Goldman Sachs, for instance, lifted its growth forecast for China from 4% to 4.6%. Some other financial institutions also did similar things, whereas for the United States, Goldman Sachs only cut its chances of a recession during the next 12 months from 45% to 35%, which means if there's a 1% loss on GDP, China will only enjoy a slower growth, whereas the US will pretty much likely enter recession. Mr. Zhou, how much pressure does that give to the United States? How much pressure does that give to China, respectively?
Well, I think that for them, they made this adjustment because that the baselines are different. China is increasing much quicker than United States before this kind of tariff war. And second, I think that is also possible because China are in a very certain environment. We are providing the openness and we are giving support to the incoming FDI from other countries. So we are providing something, and this is something that we are going to end our score on this kind of issues. So the pressures are real because that both sides are facing the challenges of the internationalization cooperation. But it's not like Donald Trump has mentioned that U.S. The children are having few toys, and also there are a lot of other things they have to depend on, like the enterprises who are producing the products. They are importing the raw materials and the intermediate products from China, and that is a very important constitution of their supply chain and industrial chain. As for Chinese companies, they are facing challenges also, especially for the export companies, and I think that is also what we are going to do because we are changing some of the tracks. We are upgrading their using of the technology and diversification of the market. So I would say if you are having just the money, you may not able to buy everything. But if you have the real products, you can depend on those products to constitute your change or reconstruction of the supply chain and the industrial chain. And that is also what we are going to do to support the domestic consumers to update their abilities in consuming different kind of things. So in this regard, I would say China will not just trying to stop this kind of idea or principles of trying to do everything under the WTO platforms.
In April, Chinese exports to the United States plunged by a fifth, understandably, and imports also fell sharply. But overall, China's total exports surged almost 10%, mostly owing to stronger demands outside of the US, most notably, for instance, by ASEAN economies and the EU. Ben, what do these numbers tell about China's diversification efforts, and are the upcoming periods of uncertainty going to reshape the international trade landscape for a much longer term? Because what's lost cannot be reclaimed so easily.
Yeah, well, it's accelerating a trend that has been going on for several years. And this goes back to when Trump first waged trade war on China in 2018. If you look at China's exports to the US, they have fallen as a percentage of China's total exports. In 2018, they were 19.2%. As of 2024, they're now 14.7% of China's exports going to the US. And ASEAN has become the largest trading partner of China. And if you look at a chart, you can see that China's exports to the US are continuously falling and China's exports to ASEAN are increasing. So this is a trend that I think will continue over time. Now, there are critics who say that actually China's rerouting these exports through Southeast Asia, which are going to the US. But for Chinese exporters, they don't really care. They just want to export these products. And if they go to Vietnam and get re-exported, well, that's a Vietnamese issue. So I think for China, this is not a big concern. Over time, China will find other trading partners, especially as there's more and more growth in Asia. It's the fastest growing region of the world, not just Southeast Asia, but also, India. I know trade relations with India are a bit complicated, but Chinese and Indian trade is increasing over time. So as the US market becomes less important and as Asia grows, I think, China will be in a good situation. And also the idea that, China is so dependent on exports, I think is a bit exaggerated. If you look at China's exports as a percentage of GDP, they're 20% of GDP. The global average is 30%. And 20 years ago, it's true that China was much more dependent on exports. They were higher they were higher than the global average. But China's internal market with 1.4 billion people is very big. Incomes have increased very substantially in China, and also tastes have changed. So it's not just that wages and incomes are higher, but also that people in China prefer buying from Chinese brands, especially the quality of these brands has increased. So we see that now the purchase of foreign brand cars has fallen significantly in China, and Chinese brands are much more popular. You can go to a major city and you can see BYD, and dozens of other Chinese electric vehicles are very popular. So I think, again, the US government, in particular the Trump administration, has overstated the dependency of China on exporting to the US market. As the meme has gone around in social media, Trump says, we have all the cards, but China responds saying, we made those cards. And it's going to be very difficult for the US to reshore manufacturing. That's going to be a process that's going to take many years, if not decades. Whereas it's easier for China to find new markets to export to.
Well, it is. It makes people on this side feels good that we are stronger going into this. But if you look at the stories of U.S. businesses, for instance, which is widely reported on the Chinese media and social media, small businesses such as toy shops, baby commodity trawlers, stuff, they are really in a state of struggle, and it's not funny. They could lose their business, and they don't know whether to invest, whether to buy more, whether to hold out, whether to divert. Ben, what can be some useful ways? I don't know whether you can provide any tips for the U.S. businesses who are finding it really hard to immediately diversify, given the unknown period of uncertainty they're looking at.
Well, it's very difficult because, again,
no, I'm talking to Bert. Sorry, it's for Bert.
Okay, sorry.
So look, some of the things, turning to the domestic market, turning to other markets is one, but I'm less optimistic than Ben, because the turning to other markets or doing it exporting to the United States through transit trade. I think we're in the final days of that. The United States is stricter and stricter on rules of origin. So exporting to Vietnam and then exporting to the United States, that will no longer be possible. The domestic market is, in my view, the future. And that requires government policies to get consumption up. The government has done quite a bit. They probably need to do more. One of the big risks that China is facing at the moment is the diversion of trade to other markets. Because that may have a reaction that they also put up tariffs against Chinese exports because they simply get overwhelmed. That is a risk that is clear in Europe and even for domestic producers in ASEAN that are not so happy with all these Chinese goods that are coming. So that is a key risk that China would need to manage.
For U.S. businesses which are struggling at this moment, especially small businesses, what are some of the tips? Should they stock up? Should they hold their breath? What should they do?
Well, for the U.S., this is the time to stock up because it might be worse after early August. But I believe that some deal will be possible, and they might at some point also hold out and say, well, a reasonable deal would look something like maybe a 20% tariff to and fro from both sides, and with that we can live. So it's not the end of the world, but in between that uncertainty, as you mentioned, Lucien, the uncertainty is really very difficult for companies to support. And there may be furlough rules that can be used to temporarily put workers sort of on leave rather than long-term restructuring of those companies, to just bridge that 90 days uncertainty gap.
Mr. Zhou, if you were to have the opportunity to speak to U.S. businesses, small business owners, what would the message be?
Yeah, in my understanding that if these companies are trying to address the demand of U.S. market, they should try to look at whether it is possible to diversify their supply chains. And if they are just focusing on the markets outside of the United States, maybe they can consider.
I'm talking about American businesses
the
once again. I'm talking about American business.
Yes.
If you can talk to American business, American toy seller, for instance.
Yeah. So, I mean, if these companies are trying to look at other markets, maybe they can invest in other countries instead of just staying in the United States, because there is a very high tariff war around the United States.
For small businesses, it's going to be very difficult to, try to sell their products abroad. They're mostly looking at American consumers.
Well, they have to prepare for this shock. They have to, negotiate of the related supply chains stakeholders about the prices and uncertainties. I think it's really hard.
We're going to leave it there. Ben, you have one sentence to add? I give you 20 seconds if you will.
It's going to be very difficult, and it's going to hurt small businesses the most. Large companies in the US, like Walmart, they have very complicated supply chains, and it might be possible for them to find other suppliers, but these small businesses don't have the resources necessary. And Trump says he's going to reindustrialize the US, but in reality, I think this actually could make deindustrialization even worse in the US.
We're going to leave it there. Many thanks to my guest, Bert Hofman, professor at East Asian Institute at the National University of Singapore, Zhou Mi, Deputy Director of the Institute of American and Oceania Study at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, and Ben Norton, founder and editor-in-chief of Geopolitical Economy Report. Thank you. With that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and X using the handle Li Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got The Point.